Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to watch the video. Never take that for granted, so welcome everybody to today's episode. Guys, today it is getting close to May. At the time of filming this video, it's April 22nd, and when May comes along, the first thing that I think about in the month of May is fishing a swim jig. Guys, May and June are the two best times of the year, in my opinion, to fish a swim jig. So we're gonna have a little comprehensive seminar on swim jig fishing. I'm gonna talk about the best colors, sizes, trailers, give you guys some tips and advice on what to look for to fish them. Because man, when they're biting a swim jig, it's one of the funnest ways to catch bass out there. So that's what we're gonna get into today's video. Also guys, a quick reminder, before we get started, anyone out there interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, you can do that by going to my Facebook page, Randy Block at Professional Angler, and just shoot me a message for info. And also I'd like to invite everybody, if you haven't had a chance, to please hit that subscribe button here at Intuitive Angling. Be much appreciated. Okay guys, I've been fishing a swim jig forever, and let me give you a little bit of history in this. People didn't always fish a swim jig. Swim jig fishing came about by the haphazard. And there may have been other people figured it out, but I sort of figured it out on my own. I was fishing a tournament. Now, this, you got to realize, the evolution of fishing happens like this. I was fishing a tournament down in Lake Dardanelle, Arkansas. It was a Central Pro-Am tournament. Now, this was back in probably the early 90s. Swim jig fishing wasn't a deal back then. People didn't fish. There wasn't a thing called swim jig fishing. It hadn't existed yet. And I was flipping and pitching my regular 3/8 and ½ ounce, black and blue flipping jig with a #1 pork frog on it into some shallow grass and reeds there on Lake Dardanelle. And water was about 2 feet deep, and I was just flipping and pitching those holes in the grass there. And I noticed that during the course of the day, I pulled my jig out of the grass and I started reeling it in, and one come up and grabbed it like a 3-pounder. And I'm just saying, well, I didn't even think much about it. And then about 20 minutes later, the same thing happened. It's like I wasn't getting any bites pitching and flipping, but as I was reeling that jig back in, they'd grab it. So obviously it didn't take, a genius to figure out what the deal was. So I started just throwing the jig out there, and I wouldn't even let it hit the bottom, and I just start reeling it in and wound up almost winning the tournament doing that. This was a long time ago. And that's how I got started into swim jig fishing, and nobody did it. Nobody knew what it was. Gradually people caught on with it, and now it's a thing, and there's specific swim jigs for certain situations. So that's what we're going to get into the video. Now, first of all, guys, I want to talk a little bit about color and size, and then we're going to get into some trailers. The swim jig I use, guys, if you're looking for a swim jig, this is the best one you can throw. This is the Megabass Ouzo Swimmer. And I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link in the description for the Ouzo Swimmer, along with everything else if you guys want to get some. If you use that link, it's a great way to support the channel. But the reason this thing is so good is, first of all, you got the fish head design on it. So when you're reeling through the water, excuse me, dang allergies here in Missouri are terrible right now, the pollen. But when you're reeling the swim jig through the water with this Megabass, it's sort of like the Okashira head design on it. It stays straight as a string. It doesn't roll off to the side. That's a big thing. And it's got a nice 3/0 nano coated, super sharp hook. This nano coat is super slick and super important here, guys. You got a really, really nice keeper here. You can see on there, when you put your plastic on there, it doesn't fall off. The fish can't pull it off. And then also the bait comes with a blade underneath it, like a little spinner. Now this, I like the spinner on there if the water visibility is pretty dirty, like around a foot and a half. But if it's cleaner than that, I'll actually take and I'll cut the spinner off. So sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't. But that's the unique thing about the Megabass Ouzo Swimmer. And I use it in 4 different colors based upon what I'm trying to accomplish. This is probably one of my favorites. It's just the shad pattern here. This is really good if the water's, a little bit dirty, got some stain to it. When fish are feeding on shad, a lot of the shad spawn in May, so this is a really good color in May. If the water is dirty, like what I consider dirty, about probably 12 inches visibility or so, I like this one, this white chartreuse and blue one. It's a little bit brighter. It sort of glows, stands out a little bit more in the water. And as you get into June, for whatever reason, I think they get off the shad patterns and they get more like on a perch pattern. So I'll use this perch pattern Ouzo Swimmer in the month of June for the most every water condition. And then also, if the water's dirty or if I'm fishing around a lot of shallow grass or tannic water, I'll go with the black and blue. Now, the size on it, it just varies. I mean, most of the time, the size depends upon how hard the wind's blowing and how deep I want to fish the swim jig. My favorite is the lighter sizes, like the 3/16 or quarter, just the lighter models. But if it's really windy or wanting to get that bait down deeper, I may go to a 1/2 ounce size, a little bit larger with that. Now, the next thing with that is matching it up with the right trailer. A lot of different swim jig trailers out there. Most people use like a Rage Craw or a Speed Craw, but guys, I'm going to show you a trailer here that not many people use that is my go-to on a swim jig, and that's this Zoom Z-Craw worm here. This is from Zoom, and what I do with it is I'll take it and I'll just pinch it down to where it's about 3 inches long, maybe a little bit less depending upon the length I want. Thread this Z-Craw worm on. This thing looks freaking awesome in the water, guys. I'll also put my Tackle Warehouse link for this Zoom worm in there too for you guys. But this is the way that I like to fish it. There's something about having that little, the worm tail on there. It just gives it a little bit more action. And this tail it really vibrates and puts out a lot of not only visual appeal, but vibration too. But this is my setup with it. And then I will use the white one if I'm, using my shad pattern. The white, guys, if you use this white Z-Craw worm with this Megabass Ezo Swimmer and you fish it around like the corners of boat docks and on riprap in the month of May, you're going to get some bites on it. This is a fish catching son of a gun right there. So that's my primary setups with that. Basically, you want to remember, the best overall that I can give you is like use shad patterns in May and then go to your perches and your black and blues in June a little bit. Now, what you want to, one other thing before we get into the type of area, let's talk about the tackle you want to use on it. A lot of people fish the swim jigs on braided line. I don't like it at all. I don't like braided line because sometimes I've got my swim jig, that far under the water. Sometimes I got it a foot under the water. I don't want that braided line to be visible under a foot under the water. So I use the fluorocarbon. I use the Seaguar and Vizex fluorocarbon. If I'm using a light swim jig, like a 1/4 ounce or something like that, I'm usually using 15 to 17 pound test Seaguar and Vizex. And if I'm using the 1/2 ounce, the larger models, I'll go to 20 to 25 pound test Seaguar and Vizex. And on top of that, I throw it on a flipping stick. I use that Megabass Alkalies flipping stick. And the good thing about a flipping stick, even with a light jig, is not only that you can cast it, but you can pitch and flip that swim jig just like you would pitching and flipping a creature bait or a jig. So let's say, for example, I'm pulling up around a boat dock that's got maybe a boat in the slip. I can take that flipping stick and I can pitch it back up in there and then reel that swim jig, or I can pitch that swim jig up in a tight corner of a lay down tree or something. I'm not really casting it. I will cast it on open banks like riprap and stuff, but for the most part, when I'm fishing a swim jig, I'm fishing it around shallow targets and I'm making long pitches and flips with that flipping stick. And the good thing about it is like you're fishing a jig. A swim jig is a jig. It's no different than like flipping and pitching a flipping and pitching jig. So I want that power. I want that ability to really set that hook hard and power that fish to the boat as quick as I can. So that's my setup, is heavy fluorocarbon line and a flipping stick with it. Now, what you want to look for as far as the areas, this is another key thing. And one other thing quick, guys, before you work it. Here's a little tip on working a swim jig, is when you throw it out there, depending upon the cover and how deep you want to fish it, you should always be shaking your rod and reeling it like that. So don't just throw a swim jig out there and reel it in and let the wagon tail do all the work. Shake your rod as you're reeling it. What this does, it causes the swim jig to undulate a little bit more. It's like the head's coming up and down like that, and the tail's wagging instead of just coming through stationary with this. So you want to try to get that thing sort of wagging like that a little bit. And also, if you reel it past a piece of cover sometimes, you always want to kill it, let it fall a couple, maybe 5 or 6 inches or something, then speed it back up. Now, what you want to look for, the type of areas for swim jig fishing is critical. It's all about super shallow cover water, super shallow cover and shallow water. Now, for me, swim jig fishing revolves around two things. It revolves around the shad spawn in May, and it revolves around the perch spawn in June, July, sometimes August, because the perch are going to spawn all summer long. So therefore, since I'm targeting shad, shallow shad spawning and shallow perch spawning, I don't hardly ever fish a swim jig, in less or in more than 3 foot of water. I'm trying to target those fish that are in 1 to 2 foot of water primarily. So go back into the flatter banks, go back into those same areas right off the bat where you think the bass are spawning, because those areas that the bass spawned in, like in April, the perch are going to spawn in those same type of areas. So go in your back of the coves, like start halfway back in the coves to 2/3 of the way back in the cove, and just fish your way all the way around the back and target whatever cover is there. If you got shallow grass, hit the shallow grass, shallow wood stumps, fish that. Docks, if you got bare banks, just concentrate on the bare banks. If you have bare banks, concentrate on the shade, because the fish will set up in those little shade pockets. So let's say, for example, you're working down the back of the cove and it's just gravelly or small rock and you don't got any cover, and there's one tree that's sort of overhanging that's throwing out maybe a shade line about this big around. Make sure you throw that swim jig in that shade line. Those big fish will set right into that shade. And if you're fishing for the shad spawn fish, those shad spawn fish on a swim jig will really like to be around any type of riprap early in the morning. So bridge riprap or riprap between docks, anything like that's really good. Dock corners, any type of shallow wood. Pay attention to those shad flickering on the surface for the shad spawn. But anyway, guys, it's such a fun way to fish, man, because the way that I like to fish a swim jig is I want to keep it in sight. So when I throw that swim jig out there, I'm always trying to keep it where I can see it. And if it goes out of sight, I bring it up again. And 90% of the fish that I catch on a swim jig, I either see them come up and hit it, or I just see a boil like a topwater lure. Super, super fun way to catch fish. So anyway, guys, that's just a few overview tips. Again, I'll link everything in the description with my Tackle Warehouse link if you guys want to get set up with this. And give it a try, man. It's a fun way to catch bass. Works from now all the way through the summer. May and June is going to be your best 2 months. Good way to catch some big ones. So hope it helps.